If you grew up anywhere near a church youth group or sat through a single session of Christian premarital counseling, he was not answering a question about weddings. He was writing to a fractured, compromised church. The word appears frequently in the Hebrew Old Testament, but almost always as a descriptor. It means worthless, wicked, or unprofitable. The phrase Bene Belial literally translates as sons of worthlessness, usually describing corrupt or violent men. But in the centuries between the Old and New Testaments, Jewish thought developed. The term solidified. By the 1st century, Belial was no longer just an adjective. It was a proper noun, it was a title. If you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, the ancient Jewish documents discovered at Qumran, you see this exact worldview. The Qumran community believed history was locked in a devastating cosmic conflict. They wrote texts detailing the war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness. And the supreme commander of the forces of darkness, the architect of deception and idolatry, was not just referred to as Satan, he was named Belial. Trying to survive in one of the most ruthless, wealth-obsessed, spiritually crowded cities in the Roman Empire. When Paul uses that specific name in Corinth, he is activating an entire apocalyptic landscape. He is forcing a church obsessed with social climbing to see the invisible war underneath their dinner invitations. Look at the Greek word Paul uses for accord, symphonesis. It is the exact root of the English word symphony. It means a blending of sounds, a harmony of voices, instruments tuning to the same pitch, to produce a single, unified piece of music. This is the mechanism Paul is exposing. The Corinthians thought they were just being practical. They thought they could honor Jesus in the church gathering, and then tune their instruments to the rhythm of Corinthian commerce on Monday. But Paul tells them they are trying to write a treaty where none exists. They are attempting to play a symphony where one side of the room is taking direction from the resurrected Christ, and the other side is taking its tempo from the ruler of the demonic realm. And he was watching them make a series of quiet, devastating compromises. There is no shared sheet music, there is no middle ground. You cannot harmonize a king and the entity actively trying to destroy his kingdom. Paul brings the cosmic war back down to the human level. Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? And then, in the 5th and final contrast, he hits the absolute center of the crisis. This is what the entire yoke metaphor has been driving toward. What agreement has the temple of God with idols? This is the target. This is the specific mechanism of compromise threatening the Corinthian church. Paul is not speaking in abstract spiritual terms. He is pointing directly at the massive marble structures dominating the city skyline. The Temple of Apollo standing over the Forum, the Sanctuary of Asclepius, the shrines where the civic and economic life of Corinth actually functioned. To understand what is actually happening in 2 Corinthians 6, we have to look past our modern assumptions about dating. In the 1st century Roman world, a pagan temple was not just a place for private religious devotion. It was the bank, it was the butcher shop, it was the center of political networking. If you wanted to maintain your social standing, secure a loan, or ensure your business was not shut out of the local trade, you walked through those stone columns and took your seat at the feast. You kept one foot in the civic religion. And the Corinthians thought they could handle it. They thought they were mature enough to know the idol was just carved stone. They could eat the meat, shake hands with the guild leaders, secure the contract, and then go worship Jesus on Sunday. But look at the word Paul uses for agreement. Synkatathesis. It means a joint deposition, a shared vote. It is the act of two parties putting their seals on the exact same legal document, binding themselves to the same terms. Paul is telling them that participating in the idol feast is not neutral networking, it is a signature. When you sit at the table of an idol, you're casting a vote of allegiance to the system that sustains it. We have to look at the physical metaphor Paul chose to use. You are taking the temple of the living God, which, as he is about to remind them, is what they are, and dragging it into a treaty with a dead block of stone. There is no overlap. The architecture of Yahweh and the architecture of paganism cannot occupy the same foundation. You have to choose which temple you are actually building. To prove this is not just a clever argument, Paul does what biblical writers often do when they reach a theological crisis. He reaches back into the story. He stitches together a rapid-fire patchwork of Old Testament texts, pulling lines from Leviticus, Isaiah, and Ezekiel. Listen to the collage he builds in verse 16. As God said, I will make my dwelling among them and walk among them. And I will be their God, and they shall be my people. In the ancient world, a temple was defined by a single, terrifying privilege, the escalating argument he builds around it, and the civic reality of Corinth itself. It was the place where the divine presence touched earth. For centuries, that meant a stone building in Jerusalem, a holy place behind a heavy veil, a geographical address where God lived. If you wanted to meet God, you went to the temple. But Paul completely upends the geography. He looks at this fractured, arguing, compromise-prone church in Corinth, people who spent their weeks arguing over meat sacrificed to idols and suing each other in pagan courts. And he points right at them. You are the temple. Not a pile of marble on a hill, not a shrine with columns. A community of broken human beings indwelt by the Spirit of the living God. This is why the yoke metaphor matters so much. This is why the contrasts are so violent. Because if you are the living dwelling place of God, you cannot hook yourself to a rival altar. What exactly is the yoke Paul is terrified of, and what does a fatal partnership actually look like? Paul keeps pulling from the ancient texts. Verse 17, "Therefore go out from their midst, and be separate, says the Lord, and touch no unclean thing. Then I will welcome you." He is quoting Isaiah and Ezekiel, calling back to the moment Israel was commanded to leave. The spiritual pollution of Babylon. Babylon was not just a city, it was a total system. It was an entire civilization organized to worship human power and false gods. And Paul is telling the Corinthians that Corinth is the new Babylon. The pagan trade guilds, the civic banquets, the temples dominating the skyline, they are part of a rival kingdom. And the believers are trying to keep 1 foot inside the temple of God and 1 foot inside the shrine of an idol. They are trying to straddle 2 worlds that cannot be reconciled. Paul's demand is absolute: walk away from the harness. The phrase Paul uses is rare. In fact, it only appears once in the entire New Testament. Step out from under the system that is shaping your desires, buying your loyalty, and eroding your witness. Therefore, go out from their midst and be separate. In a modern Western society, those words usually sound like a call to private morality, a personal decision to change your media habits or improve your behavior. But in first century Corinth, obedience to that single sentence was an economic earthquake. To go out was not a metaphor. It meant standing up from the stone bench in the guild dining room and walking out the door. It meant refusing the communal cup of wine that signaled loyalty to the local magistrate. It meant looking at the business network that provided your livelihood, the relationships that secured your future, and severing the connection. If a Corinthian Christian actually obeyed Paul, the cost was immediate. Without the guild, you lost your trade. Without the civic festivals, you lost your social protection. In a Roman colony built entirely on the patronage system, the Greek verb is heterozygio. It is a compound word. Hetero meaning different or of another kind. Where who you knew dictated whether your family ate. Separating yourself from the civic religion meant becoming a ghost in your own city. You became vulnerable, expendable, an outsider. Paul is asking them to commit social suicide, which is exactly why the command does not stand alone. Look at the promise he immediately attaches to it in verse 18, pulling from the book of 2 Samuel. "And I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty." Modern readers often hear that as sentimental poetry, a warm, emotional reassurance. But to a first-century ear, it is a legal and structural guarantee. In the Roman world, a father, the paterfamilias, was the absolute center of provision, identity, and legal protection for the household. Paul is giving them the mechanism for survival. If you step out of the civic family of Corinth, if you lose your earthly patrons and your economic safety net, God is declaring that he will step into the void. And zygos, meaning a yoke, a heavy wooden frame laid across the necks of draft animals. He becomes the patron. He provides the covering. The Corinthians are not stepping out into an empty abyss. They are stepping out of a rotting economic machine and into the household of the sovereign of the universe. So we return to where we started, the dating rule, the youth group warning. Applying the unequal yoke to marriage is a profoundly wise application of this text. If you bind your life, your family, and your future in the most intimate covenant possible, to someone who submits to an entirely different king, the yoke will chafe, the wood will splinter, the plow will tear a jagged, exhausting line through the soil. You will spend your life trying to walk toward Christ while tethered to a partner walking away from him. That application is true, but if you reduce 2 Corinthians 6 to a wedding text, you let yourself off the hook. You miss the terrifying scope of what Paul is actually demanding. You know the phrase. It is usually delivered as the ultimate non-negotiable rule for dating. To a first-century audience, this was not abstract theology, it was dirt and agriculture. Paul is not just looking at romance, he is looking at allegiance. He is asking the church in every century to look at the systems of power, the economic machines and the political alliances that promise to protect us, as long as we quietly agree to sit at their tables and play by their rules. The yoke is not just a person, it is any binding partnership that requires you to compromise your identity as the dwelling place of God in order to survive in a Babylonian system. It is the temptation to harmonize with the culture, just enough to keep your social standing intact. The call of this passage is not to flee the world. It is to refuse its harness. It is to walk through the marketplace, the boardroom, and the public square with the absolute confidence that you do not need the idol's protection. It was the physical reality of the fields outside the city walls. You do not need to sign the treaty because you already have a father, and you cannot drag the temple of the living God into a joint venture with the dark. Paul is pulling this imagery straight from the Old Testament, specifically Deuteronomy chapter 22, which contains a strange, highly practical law. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. Why? Because it is structurally disastrous. They are entirely different animals. They have different bone structures, different strides, different instincts. An ox is massive and methodical. A donkey is smaller and pulls with a different rhythm. If you force them into the same rigid collar, they cannot work. The yoke will chafe. The stronger animal will drag the weaker one. The plow will tear a jagged, useless trench through the soil. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. It is a famous command. It is practical. The work is ruined and the animals are damaged. A yoke does not just mean you are standing near someone. It means you are bound to them. It forces a shared direction. It dictates a shared pace. It demands a shared burden. This is the exact mechanism Paul is invoking. He is not warning the Corinthians about being in the same room as an unbeliever. Jesus ate with tax collectors. Paul debated in pagan marketplaces. The biblical model is not isolation, but there is a massive difference between proximity and harness. When you are yoked, you lose your autonomy. If the other animal turns left, you are pulled left. If the other animal stops, you bear the weight of the dead halt. Paul is pointing to a structural reality. It makes logical sense. The assumption is that Paul is giving the Corinthian church a strict boundary regarding romance and marriage. He is addressing what happens when a Christian surrenders their ability to walk in the direction of Christ, because they have strapped themselves to an entity pulling somewhere else. Corinth was not a quiet, contemplative village. It was a boomtown, a brutal, hyper-competitive Roman colony, sitting on an isthmus between two major seaports. Wealth flowed through the streets, and so did religion. To survive economically in a city like that, you needed connections. You needed to belong to the trade guilds. But in the first century Roman world, a trade guild was not a secular labor union. Every guild had a patron deity. Their business meetings doubled as religious festivals. They gathered in the dining rooms attached to pagan temples. They reclined on stone benches, cutting deals, while eating meat that had just been sacrificed on an altar to Apollo or Asclepius. Excavations in Corinth have uncovered these exact dining rooms. They are small, intimate. You do not marry someone who does not share your faith, because if you do, usually designed to hold about 11 people, you could not sit at those tables and blend in. When the cup was passed and the wine was poured out in honor of the god, you participated or you committed economic suicide. This is where the pressure fractured the church. The Corinthian Christians were trying to survive, and to survive, they were compromising. Paul is not telling them to stop talking to their pagan neighbors. He is not demanding a monastic retreat into the desert. In fact, in his previous letter to this exact same church, he told them the opposite. In 1 Corinthians 5, he clarified that they must associate with the immoral of this world. Otherwise, he wrote, you would need to go out of the world. Your lives will inevitably pull in two different directions. That application is entirely valid. It is wise. He expects them to be in the marketplace. He expects them to exist in the public square. But he is watching them cross a fatal line. They were not just interacting with the city. They were integrating with its systems. Believers were trying to retain their guild memberships. They were sitting at the idol feast to keep their social networks intact. They thought they could hold on to the gospel on the first day of the week and sit under the authority of a pagan system on Tuesday. They thought it was just business. Paul sees it for what it is. It is a harness. It is a formal, binding alliance with a machine built to worship something else. And to show them exactly why this fails, Paul unleashes 5 rapid-fire questions. But it also creates a massive blind spot. Because if you open the second letter to the Corinthians, to break the illusion that they can safely manage this compromise, Paul asks 5 rhetorical questions. 5 absolute contrasts. He starts with behavior. but he immediately moves to reality. Verse 14, for what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? In English, this sounds like a basic morality check. Good behavior versus bad behavior. But the Greek terms are heavier. Righteousness, dikaiosune, is the condition of being completely aligned with God's order. Lawlessness, anomia, is not merely breaking a local statute or making a mistake. It is the fundamental rejection of divine rule. It is anti-order. Paul is asking a structural question. What partnership exists between the architecture of God and the demolition of it? The word for partnership here implies a joint venture, a shared enterprise where both parties expect to profit. Paul is staring at the Corinthian believers and asking the obvious. And actually read chapter 6, you will notice something strange. Marriage is not in the text. Dating is not in the text. How do you build a business or a life or a social standing? In a joint venture with a system actively rebelling against your king? Then he strikes the second contrast. Or what fellowship has light with darkness? He shifts from ethics to environments. He moves from what people do to where they exist. Light and dark are not just philosophical metaphors. In the biblical imagination, they are competing realms. They are domains of authority. Think about the physical nature of light. It does not negotiate with the dark. It does not sign a compromise. The moment a flame is lit in a windowless room, darkness is violently displaced. They cannot share the same geometry. Yet the Greek word Paul uses for fellowship here is koinonia. It means deep shared participation, a common life, and intimate solidarity. Romance is completely absent from the surrounding paragraphs. When Paul wrote those words, Paul is forcing the Corinthians to look at the tables where they are eating. You're trying to have koinonia with a civic system governed by darkness, while claiming to carry the light. You think you are just networking. You think you are just keeping your options open in a ruthless Roman economy. But you are attempting a physical and spiritual impossibility. You cannot harness light to darkness. One will always consume the other. Paul does not stop at environments, he escalates. He pulls the lens all the way back. Past ethics, past realms, straight into the spiritual warfare raging underneath the city of Corinth. Verse 15, what accord has Christ with Belial? The contrast is no longer abstract. It is personal, it is a collision of kings. And the specific name Paul uses here requires us to slow down. Belial.